Hi, welcome to what we are calling Classic Bookmark. When we started shooting these interviews in the spring of 1988, we had no idea the show would go on for 30 years, with over 400 episodes. To celebrate and mark this achievement, we have selected 15 shows. Choosing was difficult. Most of the writers chosen, like Horton Foote and Ray Bradbury, are deceased. Others, like Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize winner, are perfectly well, but I do not think we will be lucky enough to have them on the show again. We purposely did not include some bookmark favorites like Rick Bragg, Winston Groom, Sina Jeter Naslund, Brad Watson, Daniel Wallace, Michelle Richmond, and others, since we plan to visit with them regularly in the future. Viewers will notice that the technology has improved considerably in 30 years. We've cleaned these up the best we could. These first 30 years have been a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy watching these as much as I did making them. Pat Conroy is a member of a very privileged group. He's a serious literary novelist who writes bestsellers. 4 of his books have been made into motion pictures. Most recently, Barbra Streisand starred in The Prince of Tides. He may be best known, however, for writing about fractured families, particularly his very difficult father, the Great Santini. I spoke with Conroy at Writing Today, the annual writers' conference at Birmingham Southern College. We think of Conroy as being a South Carolinian, but actually he grew up all over the South.
I never saw South Carolina until I was 15. Was born in Georgia by accident. Dad was fighting in World War II. Mom was with her mother when I arrived. I have called Atlanta, Georgia my home, simply because it was my birthplace, but I almost never lived there. And I grew up in the archipelago of southern Marine bases, and it goes from Quantico, Virginia, the Pentagon, I can also include in this, Quantico, Virginia, Jacksonville, North Carolina, because of Camp Lejeune, Cherry Point, North Carolina. Then we have Parris Island and the Marine Corps Air Station in Beaufort. When Dad would go overseas, we would then go to my grandmother's house in Atlanta, or my aunt in Orlando, Florida. So it's all the East Coast, it's all the southeastern coast, but it was not till South Carolina until we moved in 1961 for my junior year in high school.
And you did go to the Citadel, didn't you?
So I went to the Citadel, which added to the South Carolina connection, certainly.
Are you, I only know this by rumor, because I don't think we had a chance to talk about it, but are you now writing a book about your experiences with the basketball team at the Citadel?
I am writing about the 1966-67 Citadel Bulldogs. I'm trying to recreate that year. We had a losing season. I'm calling the book my losing season, A Point Guard's Way of Knowledge. And it began this way. I was signing beach music in Dayton, Ohio. And at the end of the line was a guy that played guard with me at the Citadel. His name was John DeBross. So I yelled out, "Hey, DeBross, you ever been in a bookstore before?" He said, "Yeah, once, Conroy. I was lost." He said, "Can I take you home? My wife and family don't believe I know you." And so I said, "Certainly." So we went to his house in the suburbs of Dayton. And on the way, he said, "You know, I was a much better basketball player than you, Conroy." And I said, "I know that, John. You're terrific." And he started talking about that season we had so long ago. And he said, "You remember how that season ended, your last game?" I said, "I certainly do, John, but I would never have mentioned it to you because it must be painful to you to this day. We lost in overtime at the University of Richmond in the Southern Conference Tournament, 99-98. My friend John DeBross had missed a layup in the last seconds that would have won the game for us. And then that ended my career." I said, "John, it must be terribly painful for you." He said, "In some ways, I think that game partially ruined my life." Wow. Well, I didn't realize that the guy, I have always carried that season within me. I thought that loss teaches you more than winning, that you learn more by losing, that it has a longer lasting effect, that you carry it with you. It's some kind of wound inside you. So I've gone back to see all these guys I've not seen in 30 years, met their families, and I've tried to put this year back together of what went wrong and what went right.
Well, I'm not going to spend forever on this because it's a subject I know you've talked about so many times, and in fact I've watched you talk about it a few times, and that is your father. You have the most famous literary father since Henry James Sr.
Oh, Dad. I was born, there I was born, and I had this cyclone for a dad. I mean, this...
Did he really sign books at your book signings along with you?
You know, Dad had this thing. Here in Birmingham, I was sitting in Hoover at Books A Million, and Dad comes in, and he came in every store. He followed me all around the South. And he would set up him over there, and I'd hear him tell the woman to get him a pitcher of water and a glass, and he wanted a certain kind of pen. And I looked over at him once, and I said, Dad, let me ask this. What right do you have to sign one of my novels? And he said, I am the beginning of all this, son. I am the seed. I said, you always make it sound like an agricultural store when you talk about this. But he would sit there all night, and people would find out he's there, and he would always love at a certain point that he came. Then he'd look over at me, and he'd say, hey, son, my line's longer. and he loved that. That was a point in every evening that my father simply adored. But I've never, in his eulogy, you know, when you're growing up, and I was the oldest of 7, so I was, you know, I was first in the family. I had no idea Dad was different than any other father. He would come home from happy hour every night. He would burst in and he would say, "Stand by for a fighter pilot," and you know, we'd be riveted at the door. But we didn't know other fathers were not going home saying, "Stand by for a pharmacist," you know, "Stand by for a chiropractor." We had no idea this was anything different about Dad. It was only later that we found out that we had been raised by a force of nature, not a father.
Well, you made him famous with the Great Santini. I mean, that was the character I think that got identified with your dad.
This was in the Great Santini. Here's what I should have done. Here's what I made: a terrible young novelist mistake, and I now see that. Dad's nickname in the Marine Corps was the Great Santini. I did not change much of anything. And I could have made him an Air Force pilot. I could have made him a soldier in the French Foreign Legion. I could have made him an Eskimo hunting whales, trying to get blubber for his family. I could have changed enough, but I didn't. For some reason I didn't, and it was so clearly my father, or based on my father, that it was a mistake, and I admit it. But it also made Dad come to grips with the father that I thought he had been. And my father spent the rest of his life trying to prove that my portrayal of him in the Great Santini was false and inaccurate.
Is that right? Do you think that going along in the bookstores, and I'm not speaking for you here. I've been thinking about it since I've heard so much about it. That his going to the bookstores, sitting near you, signing the books that you wrote, even if there's an unflattering portrait of him in the book, did you see that as some kind of gesture, some kind of act of love?
I thought it was a great gesture of love on Dad's part. Yeah. Here's what he'd write. You don't know how good he was at signing signatures. When he would sign the Great Santini, he would say, "Dear so-and-so, I hope you enjoy this work of my son's fiction," and he would underline fiction 3 times. Then he would sign it, "Old, lovable, likable, Don Conroy." And he would talk to the person buying the book, and they would go out of the store liking him better than they liked me. He was flamboyant and generous with his personality. Yet I thought that when he was sitting by me, you know, in whatever, by the way, it made no difference what portrait of a father I had in the book. When The Prince of Tides came out, he said, "Hey, I hear you made me a shrimper in this one, son." Right. And I said, "Dad, you couldn't catch a shrimp in a Long John Silver's." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And in Beach Music, he said, "Hey, I'm a drunk judge in this one." I said, "Dad, there's nothing about a judge about you." And he said, "But it was a great piece of literary criticism." He said, "Son, I was such a powerful influence in your life. Anytime you write the word father, you're going to have a tough time not thinking of me."
Well, that's just got to be so.
And I thought, this man could have another job in the academies.
I had been reading your books right along, from The Water is Wide right through Prince of Tides. And after The Prince of Tides, I thought, the next book of Conroys that I read, I'm not going to see an abusive father. And then the next book of yours that I did read, there were two abusive
and
fathers.
they were worse than any of the others.
And I thought to
That's very good.
I thought after The Prince of Tides, I thought, first of all, he's got it out of his system. You being the he, you've got it out of your system. And second, he's going to think, you know, it wouldn't be smart of me to do this again. But both those things were not true. You went right back into beach music and generated a Marine general and a judge who were
horrible. They're both horrible.
All right. If you were looking at that sequence of events from Santini to The Prince of Tides to beach music, which obviously you have thought about this, what made you go back and do that again?
You know, I think I'm doing a nonfiction book. I've written one chapter of a nonfiction book to be done down the road. And I think I'm going to call it The Death of Santini. And I want to talk about, and you know, now that Dad's dead, there's been a great burden lifted from me.
Yeah.
Even though there's great sorrow there, I cannot tell you how close I got to Dad in the last 20 years of his life. Mm-hmm. But in this book, I want to tell what it was like in my childhood. I want to say, actually, this is it. Here's what it was, kids. Uh-huh. And my problem was I could not tell the truth about Dad while he was living. He was much worse than I'd written about. And in this first chapter, I give a thing of my brother Jim's first memory. And I told Dad this. His first memory was of Dad having me get up off my feet, beating my head against the wall. And I can show you the wall. And I was afraid if I, presented Dad as he was, no one would believe me. No one would be able to read such a violent book. Dad tore us apart when I was a kid. And I've sort of danced around that. And where Dad was brilliant was when he said, when you use the word father, I will always come out. I mean, I've had a tough time. Yeah. Can you see me writing about father? He took his son on his knee. I said, the problem with you, Dad, is when I interviewed my own brothers and sisters for any of these books, I would say, can you remember Dad ever doing anything nice for us or to us when we were children? We came up with a blank. We couldn't come up with one thing.
And you want to write this book?
And this
upcoming nonfiction book. You want?
Now, and I'm talking about interviewing them before this book ever came out. And I want to do it because what I want to do is say, because I think the Great Santini and the series of fathers in these books horrified my father. And I want to tell how he changed his life based on these books his son wrote. Where my father had the greatest second act I've ever seen in America.
Great. Well, that's good.
He was terrific.
Yeah. Well, let's go in a different direction for a while. You have had a remarkable stretch of wins, so to speak, in terms of having your novels go to the movies. Lords of Discipline, The Great Santini, The Prince of Tides, bang, bang, bang. I mean, most novelists, don't get that. They don't get every book out to Hollywood and in a picture. Which of the films do you think was the best job of doing your book?
Because the film changed my family's life, The Great Santini is the film. And there's several other reasons that The Great Santini is the one I still go back to. It's and this was by accident. It was the one that certainly brought. Dad hated my portrayal of him. I want to tell you, he loathed that book worse than any of them. He hated the book, but it also the seeds of our redemption as father and son came from that, because though Dad loathed the book, he loved being lionized by Hollywood. He loved trying to figure out who they were going to get to play him. George C. Scott, he played Pat, and he could play Don Conroy. I mean, Dad really took this seriously. Yeah. So even when I went down to the filming in Beaufort with Dad, is Hollywood changed everybody's perception. My grandmother was asking if Helen Hayes could play her. I mean, I had never had anything like this quite go on. And when the movie came out, it thrilled my father like nothing else, in our lives together. I mean, he just thought Duvall was wonderful. The kids and I were watching one of the first showings of it in Beaufort. We had our whole town behind us. And there's a scene which, of course, we're in the front row, the family. And there's a scene in which Santini is tearing his entire family apart. Of course, it makes everybody in the theater nervous.
You bet.
And as he's beating up his entire family, my brother Jim leans down from the row, and the rest of the kids, and he goes, "Hey, Bambi." So we scream laughing because he goes, "This guy's like Bambi compared to Dad." He said, "Why didn't Dad teach him how to really take a family apart?" And the kids, we were all roaring on this thing. But from this movie, my father began his change. His remaking of himself, his renovation of his character and his reputation among his children. He died a greatly loved man.
Yeah.
Great Santini also is this, that I can tell you just for your own sake, is it's the only place we can see our mother alive, and it's the only place we can see my brother Tom, who committed suicide at the age of 34. Tom plays in the basketball team in the movie, and Mom's in the gym, sitting behind Blythe Danner.
Yeah, yeah. You had a great personal involvement, though, in the making of The Prince of Tides.
Oh yeah, I certainly did.
Yeah.
It was, and see, what I liked about The Prince of Tides was Barbra Streisand. She's more famous than Mount Rushmore. You know, I just hanging around. I've never been around somebody that famous, that fame radiated out of, and that was interesting for me as a writer. And when I worked with her and lived with her, I lived better than Louis XIV at that time. I'd never been around somebody that had so much money.
I mean, you were very actively involved in that script.
Well, yeah, well, she brought me up for I can't remember, 2 or 3 weeks up to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit across from her, and she would be sitting on a $1 zillion chair, and I'd be sitting on a $1 zillion chair, and she would read Dr. Lowenstein thing, and I'd read Tom Wingo's thing, and then I'd rewrite it, that day and bring it back. It was like homework. And I was terrified, too, because when Dad put me in the car going to Atlanta, Dad says, "Hey, son, I hear Streisand, each writer's alive." So when I said, "Thanks, Dad, I appreciate it," once more, I says, "I hear she, chews them up and spits them out, son." So I met Barbara. I told her what my father said. And Barbara said, "How long has your father known me? I don't believe we've ever met." So I just want to tell you, Barbara, so if you're mean to me, I'll leave. I'll get out of here, and I'll make fun of you the rest of my life. But she was great. I'd heard the worst things about her on earth, and she turned out to be a pleasure to work with.
Yeah. To my way of thinking, there's a particular strength that you have that not too many writers do have. I mean, not today, not historically, and that is, call it for lack of a better word, landscape. You do write some marsh, some river, some beach, and a lot of writers just cannot do the outdoors. They can't do the natural world. And you do some beautiful writing mainly of your home most beloved places. But what's the trick there?
Here's what it is. I think because I was denied a home in my childhood. I didn't have one. I grew up on federal property. We never owned a house. We moved every year. I think I was driven crazy by a lack of a home, by lack of friends. When we drove into Beaufort, South Carolina, I was 15. It's my third high school. It's my 6th move in a row. Mm. And I said, "Mom," Dad's somewhere else. He went somewhere else. I said, "Hey, Mom, no one knew me in the last high school I was at. Nobody knew me when I got there. Nobody knew me when I left." I said, "I did not spend the night with one kid at Gonzaga High School. I'm going to this school." I said, "I've never danced with a girl. I've never held a girl's hand. I've never done one thing. I've never been to a dance." And so my mother was very cute about this. She said, "Well, son, this is Beaufort. We're going to be here 2 years. We know that Dad's squadron is going to be here 2 years. Why don't you take this town by storm? Go up and make this your home. Go up to everybody and say, 'Hi, I'm Pat Conroy. I'm new here. I'd like to make some friends.'" I said, "Mom, I'm a teenager." And it was so painful. But I think there was something in that, and I've apologized to Beaufort, South Carolina for that, because who has taken his mother's benediction more than I have to heart? Who has tried to make himself a home in poor Beaufort, South Carolina, who never heard of me when we rolled into town that week? Who has tried to write about a town? And it's what I think are its incomparable glories, more than I love landscape. I love the landscape of the South. Yeah. I love the way it smells and feels and hears. I love every single thing about it. And I try to get that. I like books to do that. I try to get that into my books as much as I can.
Yeah. You do realize that most writers can't, and consequently leave it out.
Well, I thought it's because they didn't want to. I thought it was because it wasn't important to them. And I thought because it did not move them the way it moves me. And
Well,
I've had several of them tell me they didn't like it in my books because they didn't think, that kind of thing had a place, in the modern novel.
Well, I think it does, and I think when it's done poorly, the reader skips through it very quickly. But when it's done well, it's a poem. And,
It's always been important to me. It was certainly important to my mother that, this is, the way but, even when I write from Italy, I try to do the landscape of Italy.
Yeah.
I try to do that, equally as well, because I can't tell you how beautiful Italy was to me.
Why did you, you set a chunk of beach music in Rome, and you lived in Rome for several years.
Yeah.
Why did you move to Rome, and what's your story?
I was avoiding litigation from my ex-wife's ex-husband.
Oh, you were?
I certainly was.
I didn't know.
I told them the next time he took me to court, they'd be talking funny. And the next time he took me to court, we were in Italy.
And you didn't have to answer the summons. You just stayed in Italy.
Well, yeah, we handed in the summons when they came from the United States, but it was hard to get the summons to me. That caused some difficulty.
Oh. Well, the character Jack in Beach Music has his reasons for being in Rome, but I had no idea what yours were.
Yeah, those were generally it.
But you liked it.
I cannot tell you. I had no idea I would like it as much as I did. I can tell you why I loved it. I can tell you and I loved this story. When we were leaving Italy, I didn't know this when we moved there, but you go to the piazza, you have the bread store, you have the wine store, you have the pig store, the cow store, the chicken store, the lambs. You had stores for everything. And you just went to one place. And so you get to know different proprietors in these different places, and they become part of your daily life because you have to shop daily for vegetables and fruit and milk in all different stores. When we were saying goodbye, we had my daughter Susanna was born over there, and she was a baby when we were saying goodbye. And as we went to say goodbye to the piazza, the people in the piazza poured out into the street, and they were giving us gifts for the road. And the cheese man who got cheese and made sure the baby had cheese. One of the vegetable lady grabbed Susanna and said, "Susanna tutta pana," and said, "You cannot take her from us. She was born in Rome. She is a Romanina. She's one of us, a little Roman. And we're not going to let you go." And she said, "We made a mistake. You would not be able to leave if we had loved you enough." Okay, I'm sitting there, they are pouring out, giving bread, cheese, milk, wine. I would like to tell the difference of this, that when I leave the Piggly Wiggly in Atlanta to go to Rome, in a store I've been shopping in for 15 years, no one in there knows I have shopped there. I have made no personal connections whatsoever. And Rome was different in that way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what we're going to do about that. There is something very anonymous about American culture.
It was so startling to me.
But right in line with the same subject, along with Jim Harrison. You know Jim Harrison?
Yes. You don't know, I know his work. Yeah. I collect his books.
Well, he is a great writer about cooking and food and recipes, and so are you.
He's wonderful.
You too fill your books with men who cook.
And I have to. I can say this now, my mother's dead. I was born to the only Southern mother who could not cook that I know of. My mother's one of those 50s housewives who discovered frozen food. And here we are, we lived on the southeastern coast, and I thought fish were rectangularly shaped because we ate fish sticks. We never had fresh fish. We never had fresh anything. And I grew up with one of the worst cooks I have ever seen. And I marveled when I went to the Citadel. All the guys were complaining about the food. And I'm thinking, this is fabulous. I love this stuff. And I was eating things I'd never eaten, and it just seemed wonderful to me. And I got interested in cooking.
When did you start? When did you get into it?
I got it when my first wife, Barbara, went to law school. She said, "You're responsible for the evening meal. I'll be studying." I never cooked an egg. So I got out I bought a cookbook at the old New York bookshop in Atlanta. And my friend Cliff Graubart said, "I hear a Scofier is good." So I took a Scofier. I never looked at Mom didn't have a cook. So I got the Scofier. And so I spent days making stock. And I started cooking. And I was cooking meals I never heard of.
Broke in at the top.
I broke in, I had no idea. Never heard of a Scofier. And I came home, and every time I'd give, like, I made a mushroom soup from that, and my kids, my friends, everybody went nuts. And it became a way, the whole thing of food is a way of giving praise and giving thanks to your friends and your family. And I got into it, and I simply adored it. I enrolled with Natalie Dupree, who was starting one of her first cooking classes in Atlanta, in Riches. And Natalie became my first cooking teacher, and she told great stories while she cooked.
Can you say, do you have an idea about how you think you use food, cooking, kitchens, etc., in the novels?
You know, I always like to get it. I always like to get a scene where something important is going to happen. I remember in Beach Music specifically, when the sister comes back to try to talk. What was that guy? Whatever that guy's name was, Jack McCall.
Jack, sure.
Into forgiving her parents. And I try to set it in a place that I know about, that I can see in my mind's eye. I know who the waiter's going to be. Let's make him Freddie. Make for a certain restaurant. And I try to make the scene take place. I want the scene to be of great importance and great tension, but I want it to take place in an atmosphere of extraordinary beauty, and where I know what the silverware and the china looks like, and what the napkins look like. And I want this scene, as this scene takes place between these two people, I want there to be the consumption of terrific food, the right wines. And it seems like a dance to me. And it's always one that I like to compose very carefully.